The alien captain smiled. He did not know he had just signed his death warrant. Far out in the black silence of space, past the edge of the known galaxy, a small colony ship drifted quietly. Its name was the Hope's Light. It was not a warship. It carried no weapons of note, no shields worth mentioning, no soldiers ready for battle. It carried families. It carried children. It carried farmers, teachers, doctors, and old men who had left Earth many years ago, looking for a new home among the stars. For 3 generations, the people of the Hope's Light had lived a simple life. They grew crops in small metal greenhouses. They taught their children how to read the stars. They sang old Earth songs at night, songs their grandparents had sung, songs about rivers and mountains that none of the children had ever seen with their own eyes. They were peaceful. They wanted nothing more than to live quietly, far from war, far from conflict. They did not know that peace in this galaxy was often mistaken for weakness, or the alien empire that found them called themselves the Dracs. They were a proud and ancient species, tall and covered in thick gray scales, with eyes like burning coals. For 10,000 years, the Dracs had conquered world after world. They had turned entire species into slaves. They had burned cities that dared to resist them. And in all that time, no one had ever stopped them. The Drac warship that found the Hope's Light was called the Iron Fang. It was massive, a floating city of steel and weapons, built to crush anything that stood before it. Its captain, a Drac named Vorlik, had spent his whole life in battle. He had destroyed 100 worlds. He had seen 100 species beg for mercy. And when his scanners picked up the tiny, defenseless colony ship floating alone in the dark, he did not feel worry. He felt only boredom. "Another weak species," Vorlik said to his second-in-command, a Drac named Thessa. "Look at their ship. No weapons, no shields. They did not even try to hide." Thessa studied the readings on her screen. "Should we scan them first, Captain? Learn what we can before we act?" Vorlik waved his clawed hand, dismissing the idea. "Why waste the time? Whatever they are nothing. Bring us closer. Open a channel. Let us see what kind of creature is foolish enough to wander this far from home, unprotected." The Iron Fang moved closer, its massive shadow falling over the tiny colony ship like a mountain falling over a single blade of grass. Inside the Hope's Light, alarms began to ring. Captain Elena Reyes was the leader of the colony. She was not a soldier. She had been a school teacher back on Earth and later, a farmer on this ship, teaching children how to grow food in the cold soil of artificial greenhouses. She had been elected captain not because she was strong or fierce, but because the people trusted her. She was calm. She was fair. She listened before she spoke. When the alarms rang, she was in the greenhouse, helping a young boy named Miguel plant a row of seeds. She looked up at the ceiling speakers, her heart suddenly tight in her chest. "Captain Reyes, please come to the bridge," said the voice of Thomas, the ship's engineer. Something big just appeared on the scanner. Something very big. Elena wiped the soil from her hands and looked at Miguel. The boy's eyes were wide with fear. "Stay here," she said gently. "Keep planting. Everything will be fine." She did not believe her own words, but she said them anyway, because a leader's first duty was to keep the people calm. On the bridge, Thomas showed her the reading. A massive shape, 10 times the size of their ship, glowing with heat and power, sat just outside their windows. Its metal skin was gray and rough, covered in weapons the size of buildings. "What is it?" Elena asked quietly. "I do not know," Thomas said. "But it is not friendly. Look at the shape. That is a warship. That is a warship built for one purpose: destruction." Before Elena could answer, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A harsh, growling voice filled the bridge. "This is Captain Vorlik of the Drac Empire. You are trespassing in Drac space. Your ship, and everything in it, now belongs to the Empire. Surrender, and some of you may be allowed to live as servants. Resist, and you will all die." The bridge went silent. Elena stepped forward and pressed the button to respond. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking. "This is Captain Elena Reyes of the human colony ship Hope's Light. We did not know we were in your territory. We are not soldiers. We are farmers, families, children. We ask only for safe passage." We mean you no harm. There was a pause. Then, laughter. Deep, cruel, mocking laughter that echoed through the speakers. Humans, Vorlik said, still laughing. Yes, I have heard of your kind. A weak species from a small, forgotten world. Your people have no fleet worth fearing, no weapons worth respecting. You are known across the galaxy as nothing. Prey. Nothing more. Thessa's voice came through next, colder than her captain's. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with immediate destruction. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them, and something in her face had changed. The gentle schoolteacher was still there, but underneath it, something harder had woken up. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. Vorlik only laughed harder. A mistake? Little human, I have destroyed 100 worlds greater than yours. What could your kind possibly do to stop me? Elena did not answer. She cut the channel. Thomas, she said, turning to her engineer. How long until they board us? 10 minutes, maybe less, Thomas said, his face pale. Get everyone to the escape pods now, children first. Captain, the pods only have short-range engines. They cannot outrun that warship. I know, Elena said. But they are small. They can hide in the debris field near the asteroid belt. It is our only chance. Thomas nodded and began giving orders through the ship's speakers. Across the Hope's Light, families grabbed what little they could carry and ran toward the escape pods. Parents held their children close. Old men helped each other move faster than their tired legs wanted to go. There was no panic, no screaming. Just quiet, quick movement. The kind of calm that comes from people who have trained for emergencies, even ones they hoped would never come. Miguel, the young boy from the greenhouse, ran to find his mother, clutching a small bag of seeds he had grabbed without thinking. It was the only thing that felt important to save. Elena stayed on the bridge with Thomas and 2 other crew members. Someone had to keep the ship's systems running long enough for the pods to launch and get clear. Captain, they are opening a docking clamp, Tomas said. They will be inside the ship in minutes. Let them come, Elena said. Buy as much time as you can. The massive warship extended a long metal arm, gripping the side of the Hope's Light like a predator gripping its prey. Sparks flew as Drac soldiers began cutting through the outer hull. One by one, the escape pods launched, carrying families away into the darkness of space, toward the asteroid field where they hoped to hide. Elena watched the last pod leave on her screen. Miguel's pod. She allowed herself one small breath of relief. Then the bridge doors exploded inward, and Drac soldiers stormed through, weapons raised, their scaled faces twisted into expressions of contempt. Vorlik himself walked onto the bridge a few minutes later, stepping over the wreckage of the door with the casual air of someone stepping over a fallen leaf. He looked at Elena, standing calmly beside her chair, unarmed, surrounded by his soldiers. You sent your children away, Vorlik said, almost amused. A clever move, it will not save them. My ship's scanners will find those pods within the hour. Maybe, Elena said, or maybe not. Vorlik stepped closer, towering over her. You humans amuse me. Even now, facing certain death, you show no fear. Is this bravery, or simply stupidity? Elena looked up at him, her eyes steady. Neither. It is patience. Vorlik frowned, not understanding. Patience for what? For what comes next, Elena said. Before Vorlik could ask what she meant, one of his soldiers shouted from a console. Captain, something is jamming our long-range scanners. We cannot track the escape pods. Vorlik's eyes narrowed. Impossible. This ship has no advanced technology. Check again. I've checked twice, Captain. Someone or something is actively blocking our sensors. Elena allowed herself the smallest, quietest smile. You said humans are weak, she said. You said we have no fleet, no weapons worth fearing. Maybe that is true today, but you have just attacked a human ship, killed no one important, and let hundreds of witnesses escape into space. Word will reach Earth, and Earth will not forget this. Vorlik laughed again, though it sounded less certain than before. Earth? A single backward world? What could it possibly do? Elena's voice was calm, almost gentle as she answered. You are about to find out. Vorlek ordered his soldiers to take Elena and the remaining crew as prisoners. He did not kill them immediately, a small mercy, or perhaps simple curiosity. He wanted to know more about this strange species that stayed so calm in the face of death. As the soldiers dragged her away, Elena managed one last act. She pressed a small device hidden in her sleeve, a simple short-range transmitter Thomas had built in secret weeks ago, in case of emergencies just like this one. It sent a single message, tight-beamed toward the escaping pods to be relayed onward, ship to ship, colony to colony, all the way back to Earth. The message was short, simple, but it would echo across the galaxy for years to come. They started it. Far away in the asteroid field, Miguel's escape pod drifted silently among the rocks, hidden from the warship's scanners. His mother held him close, tears in her eyes, watching the distant shape of the Hope's light being pulled into the belly of the massive Drac warship. "Mama," Miguel whispered, "will Captain Reyes be okay?" His mother did not answer right away. She was staring at a small screen on the pod's console, where a message had just appeared, relayed from ship to ship across the emergency network. They started it. She did not know not yet what those words would mean. She did not know that this simple message would soon reach Earth, would soon reach the desks of generals and presidents who had spent decades preparing quietly, patiently for a day like this. She did not know that somewhere deep underground on a planet called Earth, alarms were about to ring for the very first time in 50 years. All she knew was that her son was safe for now, and that somewhere out there, something had just changed forever. On the Iron Fang, Captain Vorlek stood at the window of his ship, watching the wreckage of the Hope's light being pulled apart for salvage. He felt satisfied. Another easy conquest. Another weak species put in its place. He did not know that his warship's scanners had just been recorded, studied, and analyzed by escape pods relaying data back toward human space. He did not know that every weapon, every shield, every weakness of his beloved Iron Fang was now being catalogued by human engineers who had spent decades dreaming of exactly this moment. He did not know that somewhere far away, a message was arriving on a quiet blue-green world. They started it, and in offices and command centers across Earth, people who had waited a long, long time for a reason finally had one. Captain Vorlek smiled at the stars, proud of another victory. He did not know he had just signed his death warrant. The message arrived on Earth at 3:14 in the morning, local time in Geneva. It came through an old relay station, one of hundreds scattered quietly across human space, listening for exactly this kind of signal. For 50 years, these stations had listened. For 50 years, they had heard nothing but silence. Then, in the middle of the night, a single short message blinked onto a screen in a small, quiet room deep underground. They started it. A young officer named Sergeant Priya Nair was the one on duty that night. She had worked this post for 2 years, and in all that time, she had never seen the deep space alert light turn on. She had almost forgotten it existed. When the light began to flash red, her first thought was that it was broken. Then she read the message and her hands went cold. She did not wait. She did not question it. She pressed the emergency channel, the one connected directly to Earth's highest command, the one that had not been used in over 2 decades. "This is Outpost 7, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "We have received a Priority 1 signal from Colony Network. Repeat, Priority 1. All personnel, please confirm receipt." Within seconds, lights began turning on across the globe. General Marcus Okafor had been asleep for only 2 hours when the call came. He was 61 years old, a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen more war than most people could imagine. He had spent his entire life preparing for a day that everyone else had told him would never come. His colleagues had called him paranoid. His own daughter had once asked him, half joking, why he spent so much time worrying about aliens that had never once contacted Earth. He had always given the same answer. Because someday they will. And when that day comes, we cannot be caught unprepared. When the phone rang that night, he answered before the second ring. "General Okafor," said the voice on the other end. "We have a situation. Priority 1 signal. Colony contact lost. Message received." They started it. Okafor sat up in bed immediately, all traces of sleep gone from his mind. "Which colony?" The Hope's Light, sir. Farming colony, 17 light years out. 312 registered colonists. Survivors? Escape pods launched before contact was lost. We are still counting how many made it out. Early reports suggest most of the civilians escaped, but the ship itself and its crew, including the captain, appear to have been taken. Okafor closed his eyes for a moment. 300 families. Farmers, teachers, children. People who had left Earth looking for nothing more than a quiet life among the stars. Get me the full data package, he said. Sensor readings, video, everything the escape pods managed to record, and wake up the council. All of them. Tonight. Sir, it is 3 a.m. I know what time it is, Okafor said, already pulling on his uniform. Wake them up anyway, humanity just got its answer. 3 hours later, the Global Defense Council sat around a long table in an underground command center beneath Geneva. 12 people, representing every major region of Earth, sat in tired silence as General Okafor stood at the front of the room, a large screen behind him showing grainy footage recorded by one of the escape pods. The footage showed the massive shape of the Drac warship, the Iron Fang, looming over the tiny colony ship like a mountain over a pebble. It showed the moment the warship's weapons powered up. It showed Captain Elena Reyes's calm voice, recorded from the ship's final transmission, still trying to reason with an enemy who had already decided the outcome. When the footage ended, the room was silent. Finally, an older woman named President Amara Diallo spoke. She had been the head of the council for nearly a decade, and she had always hoped, quietly, that this day would never come. How many escaped? 289 confirmed alive, Okafor answered. 23 unaccounted for, likely captured along with the ship's crew, including Captain Reyes. And the aliens? What do we know about them? Okafor gestured, and the screen changed to show detailed scans of the Iron Fang, its weapons, its shield systems, its engine layout. The Drac Empire. Our long-range listening posts have picked up fragments of their communications for years, but this is the first time we have had direct contact. Based on the recordings, they believe humanity to be, in their words, a weak species from a small, forgotten world. A murmur went through the room. They do not know what we have built, said another council member, a sharp-eyed man named Defense Minister Hassan Rafiq. They do not know about the fleet. No, Okafor said. They do not. To understand what happened next, it helps to understand what humanity had been doing for the past 50 years. After Earth's first tentative steps into space, humans had made a discovery that changed everything. They were not alone, and worse, they were surrounded by species far older, far more powerful, and far more advanced. Early scouting missions had returned with terrifying reports of empires that had existed for tens of thousands of years. Empires that conquered without mercy. Empires that saw younger species as nothing more than resources to be used. Humanity had a choice to make. They could stay hidden, quiet, hoping no one ever noticed them. Or they could prepare. They chose to prepare. It had not been easy. Earth's governments, so used to arguing over borders and resources, had to learn to work together in ways they never had before. Scientists from every nation pooled their knowledge. Engineers worked around the clock. Soldiers from countries that had once been enemies trained side by side, learning that the old conflicts meant nothing next to the much larger threat waiting among the stars. Slowly, quietly, far from the eyes of any watching alien empire, humanity built a fleet. It was not the biggest fleet in the galaxy. It could never hope to match the sheer size of empires like the Dracs, who had thousands of years and countless conquered worlds providing them resources. But humanity had something else, something the Dracs and empires like them had long forgotten: desperation, creativity, and the memory of a history filled with war, survival, and the refusal to ever give up. Human ships were not built like Drac ships. They were smaller, faster, harder to hit. Human weapons were not the biggest in the galaxy, but they were clever, designed to find weaknesses rather than simply overpower. Human soldiers were not bred for endless conquest like Drac soldiers. They were trained, tested, and driven by something the Dracs could not understand: the fierce, personal desire to protect their homes and their families. For 50 years, this fleet had waited, hidden in secret shipyards on the far side of the solar system, disguised as mining stations, waiting for a reason. Now, they had one. "General," President Diallo said, her voice quiet but firm. "What do you recommend?" Okafor took a slow breath. This was the moment he had trained for his entire career, and yet now that it had arrived, he felt the full weight of it settle onto his shoulders. "We cannot ignore this," he said. "If we do nothing, every species watching will believe exactly what the Dracs already believe, that humanity is weak, that we are prey. We will spend the rest of our history hiding, waiting for the next attack, and the one after that." "And if we respond?" asked Minister Rafik. "We risk war with an empire far larger than our own." "We are already at war," Okafor said. "They started it the moment they attacked an unarmed colony ship. The only question now is whether we respond, or whether we let them believe they can do it again, to another colony, and another, until there is nothing left of us to save." The room fell silent again. Finally, President Diallo nodded slowly. "Prepare the fleet, General, but I want this done carefully. We do not know the full strength of this empire. We move fast, we move smart, and we bring our people home." "Yes, Madam President." "And General," Diallo added as Okafor turned to leave. "The prisoners, Captain Reyes and her crew. We will not leave them behind," Okafor said. "Humanity does not abandon its own." Within hours, secret shipyards across the solar system came alive, with activity none of them had seen in decades. Massive doors opened on hidden stations near Jupiter's moons. Ships that had sat quietly for years, maintained but unused, began powering up their engines for the first time in a generation. Soldiers who had trained for a war they were told might never come suddenly found themselves being called into active duty. Many of them were young, born long after the fleet had first been built, trained by veterans who remembered the early days of humanity's decision to prepare. Now, for the first time, that training would be tested. Among them was a young pilot named Captain David Osei, barely 28 years old, who had spent the last 6 years training for exactly this moment. He stood in the briefing room of the flagship, Terra's Resolve, listening as General Okafor addressed the assembled crews. "Some of you have trained your whole lives for a day you were told might never arrive," Okafor said, his voice carrying through the massive hall. "That day is here. Somewhere out there, an empire believes humanity is weak. They believe we are nothing more than prey to be hunted. They are about to learn how wrong they are." He paused, looking across the sea of faces, young and old, all of them staring back at him with the same quiet determination. "We are not going to war for conquest. We are not going to war for glory. We are going to war because they attacked our people, took our captain, and believed there would be no consequences. We are going to prove them wrong." The room erupted into a low, steady cheer, not the wild noise of excitement, but the deep, resolved sound of people who understood exactly what they were about to do. Far above Earth, in the quiet dark of space, the human fleet began to assemble. Ship after ship emerged from hidden docks, forming into careful formations under the guidance of officers who had spent years planning for this exact moment. It was not the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. It would never compare to the endless armies of empires like the Dracs. But it was fast, it was smart, and it was driven by something far more dangerous than mere numbers: the quiet, focused anger of a species that had just watched one of its own be taken and had decided calmly and without hesitation that this would be the last time. On the bridge of the Terra's Resolve, General Okafor looked out at the assembled fleet, ships gleaming faintly under the distant light of the sun. "Set a course," he said quietly. "Bring our people home." Somewhere far away in the depths of Drac space, Captain Vorlik was celebrating another easy conquest, unaware that the galaxy's quietest, most underestimated species had just decided it was done being quiet. The human fleet crossed into Drac territory 11 days after leaving Earth. 11 days does not sound like a long time, but for the crews aboard those ships it felt like a lifetime. There was no laughing in the hallways, no music playing in the mess halls. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer moved with quiet purpose, checking and rechecking systems that had already been checked 100 times. They knew what was waiting for them. They knew the size of the empire they were about to challenge, and still, none of them turned back. Captain David Osei sat in the cockpit of his fighter, the Swift Arrow, watching the stars slide past the viewport. Beside him, on the comm channel, he could hear the quiet breathing of his wingmate, a young woman named Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who had trained alongside him for 6 years. "You nervous?" Sarah asked quietly. "A little," David admitted. "You?" "A little," she said. "But mostly I keep thinking about that colony ship, those kids in the escape pods. I keep thinking, what if that had been my little brother?" David nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see him. "That's why we're here." The Drac border station, a smaller outpost called Kethnar Watch, had no idea what was coming. Kethnar Watch was not a major military base. It was a listening post, meant to monitor for smugglers and minor threats along the Empire's outer edge. Its commander, a Drac officer named Grath, had spent the last 15 years at this post, bored out of his mind, watching nothing happen day after day. The idea that anything dangerous could come from this direction, from the empty, unclaimed space beyond the border, was almost laughable to him. When his scanners picked up an incoming fleet, his first thought was that it was a sensor malfunction. "Run the diagnostics again," Grath ordered his technician, a younger Drac named Ilsa. "That reading cannot be correct." "I have run it 3 times, Commander," Ilsa said, her voice uncertain. "The fleet is real. 41 ships approaching at high speed." 41 ships? From where? "Unknown origin. The ship designs do not match any species in our database." Grath frowned, standing up from his chair to look at the screen himself. The ships on the display were small, sleek, oddly shaped compared to the heavy, blocky designs of Drac warships. They did not look impressive. They did not look dangerous. "Probably some minor species trying to make a name for themselves," Grath said, waving a dismissive claw. "Send a warning message. Tell them to turn back or be destroyed. That should be enough to scare them off." Ilsa sent the message. There was no response. The 41 ships kept coming. Grath was not worried, not yet. Kethnar Watch had defenses, older weapon systems left over from a past era, but still more than enough to deal with a handful of unimportant ships from an unknown species. He ordered his small defense squadron, 6 aging fighter craft, to intercept the newcomers and teach them a lesson about trespassing in Drac space. The 6 Drac fighters launched from Kethnar Watch, their pilots grumbling about being pulled away from their card game for what they assumed would be a quick, boring escort mission. They were wrong. The human fleet did not slow down. It did not send a warning message back. It simply adjusted formation, smoothly and precisely, the way a machine adjusts a single gear among 1,000 others, and the 6 Drac fighters found themselves suddenly surrounded from 3 different angles at once. "What is this?" the lead Drac pilot shouted over comms. "They are not even trying to communicate. Open fire, teach them." He never finished his sentence. The human fighters struck with a speed and precision the Drac pilots had never encountered before. It was not a simple, straightforward battle of weapons fire trading back and forth. The human ships moved in tight, coordinated patterns, using each other's positions to create angles the slower Drac fighters could not track. Within 90 seconds, all 6 Drac fighters were disabled or destroyed, their pilots ejecting into escape pods, stunned and confused by how quickly the fight had turned against them. Back at Kethnar Watch, Grath stared at his monitors in disbelief. That is not possible," he stammered. 6 fighters, gone, in under 2 minutes." "Commander," Ilsa said, her voice trembling slightly, "the human fleet is now approaching the station directly." David Osei watched the aftermath of the brief skirmish through his cockpit display, feeling no joy in the victory, only a grim sense of duty being carried out. "Status report," he said into his comm. "All 6 enemy fighters neutralized." Sarah's voice came back. "No serious damage to our squadron. A few scratched paint jobs, that's about it." "Copy that," David said, forming up for approach on the station. Behind the small fighter squadron, the main body of the human fleet continued its slow, steady advance toward Kethnar Watch. General Okafor, watching from the bridge of the Terra's Resolve, allowed himself a small, quiet nod of satisfaction. "Send the message where," he said to his communications officer. "Same terms as before. Surrender the station, release any human prisoners you may have, and no more lives need be lost today." The message went out. This time, there was a response. Grath's voice, shaking with barely controlled panic, came through on the human fleet's comm channel a few minutes later. This is Commander Grath of Kethnar Watch. We do not have any human prisoners here. We do not know what you are talking about. Please, we surrendered our fighters. There is no need for further violence. You have no prisoners, General Okafor repeated calmly. Understood. We are not here to attack your station, Commander, if you cooperate. We ask only two things: full sensor and technical data on your Empire's fleet capabilities, and safe passage toward Drax Central Command. There was a long pause. You want to go to Drax Central Command? Do you understand what you are asking? That is the heart of the Empire. Thousands of warships defend that system. We understand perfectly, Okafor said. We would still like the data, Commander. Cooperation now may earn you and your crew leniency later when this conflict ends. Grath, terrified and desperate to avoid further bloodshed, agreed to the humans' demands almost immediately. Within the hour, his station transmitted every scrap of sensor data, fleet positioning information, and technical schematics it had access to, directly into the human fleet's databanks. It was not much in the grand scheme of the Empire's full military strength, but it was enough. Enough to confirm troop movement patterns. Enough to identify key shipyards. Enough, most importantly, to locate the likely detention facility where captured prisoners, including Captain Elena Reyes and her crew, were most likely being held. Word of the skirmish at Kethnar Watch reached the Drac Imperial Council within hours, carried by a panicked messenger drone that Grath had launched the moment the human fleet departed his station. The council chamber, deep within the Drac capital world of Vrenthar, was a massive circular room lined with ancient stone columns, each one carved with the names of conquered species from thousands of years of Drac history. 12 council members, the oldest and most powerful Dracs in the entire Empire, sat around a raised platform, listening in stunned silence as the report was read aloud. 6 fighters destroyed in under 2 minutes, said Councillor Threxa, an ancient Drac who had served on the council for over 300 years. By a fleet of only 41 ships, from a species we know almost nothing about. It must be an error, said another councillor, a younger Drac named Morvain, though his voice lacked confidence. Perhaps Commander Grath exaggerates to excuse his own incompetence. Grath has served this Empire faithfully for 15 years, Threxa said sharply. He has no reason to lie and every reason to report accurately, given the consequences of failure. The chamber fell into uneasy murmuring. Finally, an old council member near the back of the room spoke up. His name was Korvash, and he was known throughout the Empire as something of an eccentric, obsessed with old records and ancient histories that most other Dracs considered pointless. He rarely spoke during council meetings, and when he did, most members simply waited politely for him to finish before ignoring whatever he said. This time, however, something in his voice made the room go quiet. I have read of this species before, Korvash said slowly. Humans. Earth. There are old records, buried deep in our archive systems. Warnings passed down from an older empire that once tried to study them, many centuries ago. Warnings? Threxa asked. What kind of warnings? Korvash hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The old records describe humans as a species that should never be underestimated, not because of their technology, which was primitive even then, but because of something else. A pattern of behavior, seen again and again throughout their history, on their own world, long before they ever reached the stars. What pattern? Morvain asked, curiosity overcoming his earlier dismissiveness. Humans do not fight like other species, Korvash said. They do not fight for glory, or conquest, or the simple joy of battle. They fight only when they believe they have no other choice, when something they love is threatened. And when that happens... He paused, looking around the room slowly. They do not stop, not ever, not until the threat is completely gone. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. This is superstition, Threxa said finally, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Old records from a forgotten era. We are the Drac Empire. We have conquered 100 worlds greater than this one. We will not be frightened by a handful of destroyed fighters and old ghost stories. Perhaps, Korvash said quietly. I only hope you are right, Counselor. For all our sakes, back aboard the Terra's Resolve, General Okafor studied the newly acquired sensor data with his senior officers, mapping out possible locations for the detention facility holding Captain Reyes and her crew. "Here," said Colonel Amina Bello, pointing to a marked location on the holographic display. "A moderate-sized facility, 3 jumps from our current position. Records suggest it is used for holding prisoners of, quote, minor value species before processing into the labor system." Okafor's jaw tightened at the phrase. "Minor value species. That is their term, sir, not ours," Bello said quietly. "I know," Okafor said. "That is exactly why we are here. Prepare a strike team. We move on that facility within the day." David Osei, standing nearby among the assembled pilots, felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he had felt back on Earth when the mission first began. But underneath the nervousness, something else had begun to grow. A quiet, steady confidence, born from watching the first skirmish unfold exactly as they had trained for. The Dracs called humans weak. They called them prey. Slowly, ship by ship, battle by battle, humanity was about to teach the galaxy a very different lesson. The detention facility known as Processing Site 9 sat on a small gray moon orbiting a gas giant deep within Drac territory. It was not a prison in the way most species imagined prisons. There were no cells with bars, no guards walking hallways with weapons drawn. Instead, it was a quiet, efficient place, built for one purpose only, preparing captured beings from lesser species to be sorted, labeled, and sent off into a lifetime of labor somewhere across the Empire. Captain Elena Reyes had been held there for 9 days. She did not know how much time had passed on Earth. She did not know if her message had ever arrived or if anyone was coming. All she knew was the small gray cell she shared with Thomas and 2 other crew members and the quiet, constant hum of the facility's machines outside the door. "They will process us soon," Thomas said quietly one evening, sitting against the wall of their cell. "I heard the guards talking. Something about a transport ship arriving within the week." "Then we still have time," Elena said. "Time for what, Captain? We have no weapons, no way out. What exactly are we waiting for?" Elena looked at him steadily. "I told Vorlik something before they took me. I told him humans do not forget. I meant it." Thomas managed a tired, small smile. "You really believe they are coming?" "I know they are," Elena said. "It is only a matter of when." Word of what happened at Kethnar Watch spread through the Drac Empire faster than anyone expected. At first, most Dracs dismissed it as an unimportant skirmish, a minor embarrassment quickly forgotten among an empire that had existed for 10,000 years and conquered countless worlds. But then came reports of a second engagement, closer to the border, where a full squadron of Drac patrol ships had been intercepted and defeated by the same small human fleet, this time without losing a single human vessel. Then came the third report. A supply convoy moving quietly between 2 Drac systems was ambushed. Not destroyed outright, which the Drac military leaders almost would have preferred, since destruction at least made sense as an act of war. Instead, the human fleet disabled the convoy's engines with precise targeted strikes, boarded the ships, freed a group of enslaved workers from 3 different conquered species being transported for labor, and left without harming a single Drac crew member who surrendered peacefully. It was strange. It was confusing. And to the older, more experienced officers who had spent their lives fighting wars of conquest, it was deeply unsettling. "They are not fighting like an enemy," said a Drac fleet commander named Yolvash, reviewing footage from the convoy attack with a group of fellow officers. "An enemy destroys what it cannot use, kills what surrenders, takes what it wants. This is something else." "What is it then?" asked a junior officer. Yolvash did not answer immediately. He simply stared at the footage, watching human soldiers carefully guide freed slaves toward escape pods, showing the same calm efficiency they had shown in destroying enemy fighters only minutes earlier. "I do not know," he said finally, "and that frightens me more than if I did." Back in the council chamber on Vrenthar, Councillor Korvash found himself, for the first time in decades, being asked to speak at length. "Tell us everything," Threxa said, her earlier confidence noticeably shaken after 3 consecutive incidents involving the mysterious human fleet. everything you know from these old records?" Corvash nodded slowly, gesturing for the chamber's ancient archive system to display images on the central hologram. Faded records, thousands of years old, appeared before the assembled council, showing crude sketches of a species that looked remarkably similar to the humans currently causing chaos along the Empire's border. An ancient empire called the Vothkar encountered this species long before recorded Drak history began, Corvash explained. The Vothkar were, at the time, among the most powerful empires in this quadrant of the galaxy. They discovered a small, isolated world, populated by a young, primitive species still fighting among themselves. Believing them weak and easily conquered, the Vothkar began a campaign to subjugate them. And? Morvain asked. The Vothkar Empire no longer exists, Corvash said simply. The chamber fell silent. You are saying this? This human species destroyed an entire empire? Threxa asked, disbelief clear in her voice. I am saying the records are incomplete, Corvash admitted. We do not know the full details. What we do know is that the Vothkar campaign against Earth lasted less than a single generation before their empire, previously stable for over 4,000 years, collapsed entirely. Some records suggest internal rebellion. Others suggest the humans themselves found a way to strike back, turning the Vothkar's own conquered peoples against them. That is absurd, said another council member. One young species could not possibly cause the collapse of an empire that size. Perhaps not alone, Corvash said. But if the pattern from the old records holds true, humans do not fight wars of conquest. They fight wars of survival. And when a species fights only for survival with nothing left to lose, history shows us again and again that such wars often end very badly for the more powerful side. Yolvash, still troubled by what he had seen in the convoy footage, requested and received permission to lead the Empire's response personally. He gathered a force considerably larger than anything sent before, nearly 200 warships, more than enough by any reasonable measure, to overwhelm the small human fleet completely. We end this quickly, Yolvash told his assembled officers before departure. No more small skirmishes, no more testing their strength. We meet them with overwhelming force and crush them before this becomes something larger. It was on paper, a sound strategy. Overwhelming numbers had won the Drak Empire 100 conflicts across 10,000 years. There was no reason to believe this time would be different. Yolvash's fleet found the human forces near a quiet, unremarkable system, exactly where sensor data suggested processing Site 9 was located. The human fleet, still numbering only around 40 ships, sat waiting calmly at the edge of the system, seemingly unbothered by the arrival of a force 5 times its size. They are not retreating, Yolvash's second-in-command noted with surprise. Should we not expect them to flee given our numbers? Let them stay, Yolvash said grimly. It will make this easier. What Yolvash did not know, what his sensors could not detect, was that the bulk of the human fleet's true purpose that day was not to fight his warships directly at all. While Yolvash's massive fleet prepared for what he believed would be a swift, decisive battle, a small, specialized strike team of only 6 human ships had already slipped quietly past the edges of his formation hours earlier, using data gathered from Kethnar Watch to navigate a path directly toward processing Site 9 itself. Captain David Osei led this smaller team personally, alongside Lieutenant Sarah Kim and 4 other elite pilots specially trained for this exact kind of precision operation. Approaching the facility, David said quietly over comms as the moon-holding processing Site 9 came into view. Minimal defenses detected, exactly as the intelligence suggested. They really did not expect anyone to come this deep, Sarah said. No, David said. They didn't. The strike team moved quickly and quietly, disabling the facility's minimal defense systems with practiced precision before landing a small ground team near the detention block itself. Guards, expecting nothing more dangerous than the occasional minor security drill, were caught completely off guard by soldiers who moved with calm, professional efficiency, subduing resistance without unnecessary violence wherever possible. Inside her cell, Elena heard the sudden commotion outside, shouting voices, the sound of doors being forced open down the hallway. Captain, Tomas said urgently, standing up. Do you hear that? Before Elena could answer, their cell door slid open, revealing a human soldier in unfamiliar armor, weapon raised but pointed safely toward the ground. "Captain Elena Reyes?" the soldier asked. Elena stood slowly, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "Yes. Sergeant James Okoro, Human Strike Team. We're getting you out of here." For the first time in 9 days, Elena allowed herself to feel something other than calm, careful patience. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over her. "I told you they would come," she said quietly to Thomas, her voice trembling slightly with emotion she had held back for days. Meanwhile, back at the edge of the system, Yolvash's massive fleet finally engaged the remaining human forces, expecting a swift, overwhelming victory. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that fought with the same strange, precise tactics reported from earlier engagements, using the superior numbers of the Drac fleet against itself, creating confusion in their formations, striking weak points with calculated precision rather than simply trading blows in a straightforward battle of attrition. The battle lasted nearly 3 hours, far longer than Yolvash had anticipated. And though his forces ultimately forced the smaller human fleet to withdraw, the cost had been far higher than expected. Nearly 30 Drac warships were destroyed or disabled, a staggering loss for what should have been an easy victory against a numerically inferior enemy. More troubling still, by the time Yolvash's fleet regrouped and turned their attention toward processing Site 9, they found the facility empty, its prisoners gone, extracted cleanly and completely by a strike team no one had even detected until it was already too late. "They used us," Yolvash realized slowly, staring at the empty facility's wreckage. The entire battle, the entire fleet engagement, it was never about defeating us. It was a distraction. His second-in-command said nothing, too stunned by the realization to respond. News of the failed engagement reached the council chamber within hours, carried this time not by a panicked messenger drone, but by Yolvash himself, standing before the assembled council, with the weary, shaken expression of a commander who had just learned something deeply unsettling about the nature of his enemy. "They do not fight to win battles," Yolvash reported grimly. "They fight to accomplish objectives. The battle itself, the ships, the losses on both sides, all of it was simply a means to an end. They wanted their people back. They got them back. Everything else was irrelevant to them." Corvash, sitting quietly at the back of the chamber, allowed himself a small, grim nod, as though confirming something he had long suspected. "The old records were right," he said quietly, though few in the chamber were listening closely enough to hear him. "This is not a war of conquest we are facing. This is a war of survival, and history shows us, again and again, how such wars tend to end." Across the Drac Empire, word began to spread, quietly at first, then louder, among soldiers, officers, and citizens alike. A strange unease settled over worlds that had known nothing but confident, unquestioned dominance for thousands of years. The Empire had called humans weak, primitive, unworthy of serious concern. Now, for the first time in living memory, the Drac Empire began to prepare not for another easy conquest, but for something it had almost forgotten how to feel: fear. 3 months passed after the rescue at Processing Site 9. In that time, the war between humanity and the Drac Empire grew far beyond anyone's early expectations. What had begun as a single attack on an unarmed colony ship had become something the entire galaxy was now watching closely. Neighboring species, many of whom had suffered under Drac rule for generations, watched with growing interest as a small, previously unknown species fought the mighty Empire to a standstill, battle after battle. Humanity did not have the numbers to match the Drac Empire ship for ship. Everyone knew this, including the humans themselves. But numbers, it turned out, were not the only thing that decided a war. Human forces struck quickly, hit precise targets, and withdrew before the Empire's larger fleets could respond in full force. They freed enslaved workers from conquered worlds whenever they found them, quietly building alliances with species who had long dreamed of freedom but never dared hope for it. Slowly, word spread across occupied worlds. Humans did not conquer. Humans did not enslave. Humans fought only to end the fighting, and treated those they defeated with unexpected mercy, so long as that mercy was not tested twice. For an empire built entirely on fear and dominance, This was perhaps the most dangerous weapon of all. Captain Elena Reyes, fully recovered from her time in captivity, had been given a new role by General Okafor, one she had not expected but quickly grew into, chief negotiator between humanity and the growing number of species now seeking alliance against the Drac Empire. "They trust you," Okafor had told her months earlier aboard the Terra's Resolve. "You survived captivity with dignity. You showed them mercy is not the same as weakness. That matters more than any weapon we could build." Elena had accepted the role with the same quiet determination she had shown from the very beginning. Over the following months, she met with representatives from a dozen different species, each of whom had suffered under Drac rule in their own way, each of whom now saw for the first time in generations a real chance at freedom. By the time the final battle approached, humanity did not fight alone. The Drac Council, meanwhile, found itself increasingly divided. Councillor Threxa, once confident and dismissive, had grown noticeably quieter in recent months, watching report after report of Drac losses pile up across the border regions. Councillor Morvain, once eager to dismiss the old warnings as superstition, now found himself frequently seeking out Corvash's counsel, desperate for any insight into an enemy the Empire still barely understood. "We must sue for peace," Morvain argued during one tense council session. "Every battle costs us more than we gain. Our conquered worlds grow restless, inspired by the humans' example. If this continues, we risk losing everything we have built over 10,000 years. "Peace?" Threxa said bitterly, though her earlier confidence had clearly faded. "We are the Drac Empire. We do not sue for peace with lesser species." "They are not lesser," Corvash said quietly, finally speaking with the full confidence of someone who had been right from the very beginning, though he took no joy in it. "They never were. We simply refuse to see it." Ultimately, pride won over caution. The Council authorized one final massive campaign, gathering nearly the entire Imperial battle fleet, over 600 warships, the largest force the Empire had assembled in centuries, with orders to end the human threat once and for all, regardless of cost. Human intelligence, aided by their growing network of allied species, learned of the coming attack weeks in advance. 600 ships, Colonel Bello reported grimly during the final strategy meeting aboard the Terra's Resolve. "Nearly 15 times our current fleet strength, even counting our new allies' contributions. They mean to end this in a single battle," General Okafor said, studying the tactical display carefully. "No more testing our strength, no more small skirmishes. This is everything they have." "Can we win?" asked a younger officer nervously. Okafor considered the question carefully before answering. "Winning was never about matching them ship for ship. It never has been. We win by making sure that whatever they throw at us, it costs them more than they are willing to pay." He turned to the assembled officers, his expression calm but serious. "We have spent months studying their tactics, their weaknesses, their command structure. Their fleet is powerful, but it is rigid, built for overwhelming smaller, disorganized enemies quickly. We are not disorganized. We are not going to fight the battle they expect." The final battle took place near a quiet system the humans had begun calling Threshold, the last major checkpoint before reaching the Drac homeworld itself. 600 Drac warships arrived in perfect, imposing formation, their massive shapes filling the void of space like a wall of gray steel, stretching farther than the eye could see. Against them stood a considerably smaller force. 63 human warships, reinforced by nearly 40 additional vessels contributed by newly allied species, all coordinated under unified human command. Aboard the lead Drac flagship, Fleet Admiral Threxa herself, who had insisted on personally overseeing this decisive campaign, watched the smaller enemy fleet with grim satisfaction. "They stand and fight," she said to her officers. "Foolish, but perhaps fitting. Let this be the battle history remembers, the moment the Drac Empire finally silenced this troublesome species for good." She gave the order to advance. What followed was unlike any battle either side had fought before. The human fleet, rather than meeting the Drac advance head-on, split into dozens of smaller, highly coordinated groups, striking at specific sections of the massive Drac formation with precise, devastating efficiency before retreating just as quickly. Allied ships unfamiliar with human tactics only months earlier now moved with practiced coordination, having spent weeks training alongside their new human allies. They are not engaging directly, Threxa observed with growing frustration, watching her formation's edges being picked apart piece by piece. Bring the central fleet around, crush them before they can regroup. But every time the massive Drac formation adjusted to counter one strike, another group of human and allied ships struck elsewhere, exploiting gaps created by the Empire's own defensive maneuvers. The sheer size of the Drac fleet, once its greatest strength, had become a liability, too large and cumbersome to respond quickly to an enemy that refused to fight on the Empire's terms. Captain David Osei, now a seasoned veteran of a dozen major engagements, led one of these strike groups personally, guiding his pilots through a complex, practiced maneuver that had become almost instinctive after months of continuous warfare. Formation Delta on my mark, he said calmly over comms. Target their central command relay, then withdraw immediately. Copy that, Captain, Sarah Kim's voice responded, steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The strike succeeded perfectly, disabling a critical communication relay at the heart of the Drac formation, creating confusion that spread outward through the entire fleet, like cracks through glass. Hours into the battle, with Drac losses mounting far beyond anything the Empire's leadership had anticipated, Fleet Admiral Threxa found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. Admiral? Her tactical officer reported, voice tight with barely controlled panic. We have lost over 200 ships. Our formation is fractured across a dozen separate engagement zones. We cannot regroup fast enough to counter their strikes. Threxa stared at the tactical display, watching decades of assumed superiority crumble before her eyes. The human fleet, still numerically far smaller, had somehow turned the Empire's greatest strength, its overwhelming size, into its greatest weakness. How is this possible? She whispered, almost to herself. We outnumber them 15-1. Corvash's words, spoken months earlier in the quiet halls of the council chamber, echoed suddenly in her memory. They do not fight wars of conquest. They fight wars of survival. And such wars, history shows us, often end very badly for the more powerful side. For the first time in her long career, Fleet Admiral Threxa considered the possibility of defeat. The turning point came when General Okafor, watching the battle unfold from the Terra's resolve, made a calculated decision that would define the rest of the conflict. Rather than continuing the slow, grinding war of attrition, he ordered his forces to focus every remaining strike directly toward the Drac flagship itself, using the confusion already spreading through the Empire's ranks to punch through weakened defenses and threaten the heart of their command structure. If we can force their flagship to withdraw or surrender, Okafor explained to his officers, the rest of their fleet will lose coordination entirely. This is not about destroying 600 ships. It is about ending this before more lives are lost on either side. The final assault on the Drac flagship was fierce and costly, but ultimately successful. Human and allied forces disabled the flagship's primary weapons and shields, leaving Fleet Admiral Threxa with an impossible choice: continue fighting a battle already clearly lost, sacrificing what remained of her fleet for pride alone, or accept the unthinkable. Surrender. This is Fleet Admiral Threxa of the Drac Imperial Battle Fleet. Her voice came through, quiet and defeated, over the open comm channel. We request terms of surrender. Aboard the Terra's Resolve, General Okafor allowed himself a long, tired breath before responding. Terms are simple, Admiral, he said. Immediate withdrawal from all contested territories, release of all remaining prisoners from every species currently held by the Empire, and a formal end to further hostilities against Earth and against any species who has allied with us in this conflict. There was a long pause. And if we refuse? Then we continue, Okafor said simply. But I do not believe either of us wants that, Admiral. Enough people have died today. Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, Threx's voice returned, quieter than before. Terms accepted. Word of the Drac Empire's surrender spread across the galaxy within days, carried by relay stations and allied species eager to share the news with worlds that had lived under Imperial rule for generations. Celebrations broke out on dozens of formerly conquered worlds, as centuries of fear finally began to lift. Aboard the Terra's Resolve, Elena Reyes stood quietly beside General Okafor, watching the last of the Drac fleet withdraw from the system. "They called us weak," she said softly. "They called us prey." "They were wrong," Okafor said. Elena nodded slowly, thinking of the colony ship that had started it all, of Miguel and the other children who had escaped into the darkness of the asteroid field, of the quiet, patient anger that had carried her people through months of war they had never wanted, but had refused to run from. "No," she said quietly. "They were more than wrong. They forgot something every conquered species eventually learns the hard way, far below, on newly freed worlds across the former Drac Empire. That lesson was already being whispered from world to world, a warning that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had never wanted to be feared. It had only ever wanted to survive. But now, having survived, having endured, having proven that mercy and strength could exist together in the same quiet, determined heart, the galaxy finally understood the truth. They called humans weak. Now the galaxy calls them legends. The end.